Black Adam. Nearly 5,000 years after he was bestowed with the almighty powers of the Egyptian gods, Black Adam is freed from his earthly tomb, ready to unleash his unique form of justice on the modern world. And within that includes Dwayne Johnson kicking a whole lot of butt for 2 hours and a really good time. So if I had to describe my experience with this movie in one sentence or phrase, I would say that although this movie feels very familiar and is nothing that I haven't seen before, it provides a really inconsistent time. However, it's action-packed for most of it, and it's a really, really fun time at the movies that you won't soon forget. And even as someone like me who doesn't necessarily really enjoy superheroes all that much, I went into this movie having no expectations, and I was very pleasantly surprised by the time I walked out. So let me start off with what I really enjoyed about Black Adam. The movie's action, I gotta say, is pretty stellar, and there's a whole lot of it. I would say at least 70% of this movie is action, whether it be in people fighting, whether it be slow motion, whether it be in electricity flying in the air. There's a whole lot of it, and it never gets old, which is kind of an amazing thing. For this movie to be 2 hours long, the majority of it being action, you feel like it would get stale after a while, but no, it keeps a way of being reinventive in its own right, and it makes for a really fun time. Like, if you are in the mood to go to a movie and you're just like, I want as much action as I possibly can, this movie is definitely it, because there is just a plethora of it. And because of that, it really makes this movie a genuinely fun time, because there's almost always something going on. You're never really lulled to sleep, and it really makes the pacing in this movie quite effective. Anytime movies are above 2 hours, at least for myself, I always kind of think, all right, I hope this movie's pacing doesn't suck. And this movie does a great job of not being boring, but being above 2 hours, which is, I think, critically important. If your movie's on the longer side of runtimes, you don't want to bore your audience, you don't want to make things feel stale. Black Adam does a great job of balancing that out really well. And it also helps when you've got really great leads in the movie. Of course, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson crushes it. This is bread and butter as an action star, and then you've got some great supporting characters, and Pierce Brosnan especially, but also Aldous Hodge. I think the two of them bring something to this movie that was needed when you need a little bit of variety in the characters that you're seeing on screen, because without Aldous Hodge and Pierce Brosnan in this movie, all you would see is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, which after 2 hours I think might get a little stale, but I think with having Aldous Hodge and Pierce Brosnan, you bring some balance to the movie. Their characters were very different. It introduced some philosophical differences in the overall story, which made it a little bit more interesting. And their performances, I thought, were really stellar. It just really made the movie, I think, at an elevated level than what it would have been otherwise. And it's not to say that Dwayne Johnson didn't carry this movie or isn't capable of carrying this movie, but it's nice to add a little bit of variety into your films, and I think that Pierce Brosnan and Aldous Hodge provided that here. And additionally, although this kind of strayed from the movie's typical cadence, it does introduce some interesting philosophical questions about the nature of right and wrong, even if they're just brief shining moments in the movie. Within some of the dialogue, some comments are made around that vein, and I thought to myself that it was pretty interesting to introduce in the movie. And like I said, it's very brief moments because most of this movie is action. However, I just really like that little additive bonus in there to really make this movie just slightly different. I found myself asking my own questions just based on these little bits of dialogue. I really appreciated it for that. So what did I not enjoy so much about this movie? I thought the movie was pretty inconsistent overall in terms of the quality, as I just spit all over my microphone. That's gross. But the first act of this movie I thought was abysmal. The second act I thought was the best part of the entire thing. And the third act I thought dragged on just for a little too long. So in that first act, it would be like this. Picture the Uncharted games and the Tomb Raider games had a baby, and a movie came out of it. Now, within that movie, picture a random superhero that's within its entirety that no one's ever heard of before. And then add in a little bit of really poor dialogue. That's what this first act of the movie was. It was really choppy. It was really corny. None of it really made sense. It was just extremely over the top. I thought I was going to be in for a train wreck of a movie in the first act, and I was just really, really nervous. And it was just so poor that I'm like, wow, this is probably one of the worst acts of a movie I've seen in a long time. But like I said, the second act of the movie picks up tremendously. It introduces the best parts of the entire movie. And then the third act, I would say, is somewhere in the middle, where I would say on the whole it's pretty solid. However, I think the fight scenes drag on for a little bit too long. The movie, I think, just takes a little bit while longer than it should have to wrap up, which I know I mentioned earlier that the pacing of the movie was one of my favorite parts of it. However, the exception to that is going to be this last act and a couple of the fight scenes, because it just took a little bit too long to end. If they just cut down these fight scenes in half or by a third, I think it would have really helped the runtime, maybe even made it about an hour and 45 minutes, which would have been a really nice sweet spot for this movie. And additionally, this is a slight nitpick I have with the movie, but I could tell that the ADR in the film was a little off. For those of you who don't know what ADR is, essentially what happens is when you film a movie and some of the dialogue that the actors are saying, if it doesn't come out right, they re-record it and do some lip dubbing after the movie is filmed. Well, in Black Adam, you can tell that some of these lines are re-recorded. However, the mouthing and the lip syncing of the actors and the re-recorded dialogue later on doesn't always quite match up, and you can tell they're really trying to hide it in the movie. I might have only noticed because I watch movies constantly. However, to me it was a little bit distracting, and I could really tell they were trying to hide it. It's abundantly apparent in that first act. However, I can tell it's sprinkled a little bit throughout the rest of the movie, and although it doesn't kill the experience or anything, it does detract a little bit from the experience. It's just when the actors' mouth movements are not matching up with the dialogue, it's just really off-putting. So friends, in the end, I'm gonna have to give this movie a 7 out of 10. I thought it was a spectacular time if you're looking for something a little bit more on the action side of things. And one of the best parts is, if you know nothing about Black Adam or aren't really a fan of superheroes, I think there's still some fun for you to be had here, especially if you're into action. Or if you just like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, because there's a whole lot of him in this movie, there's a whole lot of action in this movie. If you like either of those two things, you're in for a pretty good time. Friends, thank you so much for watching another movie review. If you like this or thought it was helpful, I'd be honored if you consider clicking the like button, clicking subscribe, clicking these end cards up above, or the links down in the description below for your viewing pleasure. Once again, I've been Bryce. Until next time, have a great day.